Good morning, everybody. Welcome to our webinar. Sorry, I'm a minute late. Had a little connectivity problems there, but I think I'm online and good to go. My name's Peter Carson. I'm going to be joining you for the next hour or so, taking through a session on Office 365 communication sites, modern team sites, and provisioning around those. So as I mentioned, my name's Peter Carson. I'm a SharePoint MVP, president of Envision IT and Extranet user manager, and a partner seller with Microsoft Canada. We're going to post a copy of the slide deck up on our site afterwards, and we'll send an email link out to everybody so you get all my contact information at the end of the session. Quick introduction as well on Envision IT. We are a group of Office 365 productivity consultants based in Mississauga, Canada, primarily focused on building SharePoint websites, intranets, and extranets. Been working with SharePoint right back to the original 2001, lots of different awards and such as well. Also president of Extranet user manager, who's sponsoring the session here today. We're not going to be touching the Extranet User Manager product. It's part of a webinar series. We're going to be doing it on the next session that's coming up in 2 weeks' time that I'll touch on at the end of this session. But just to give you a quick overview on that as well. Extranet User Manager is really about delegated management of external users, bringing people in from outside your organization, whether that's through self-registration, approval workflows, profile management, passwords, really being able to easily manage the users and the groups that they belong to. We support on-premises as well as Office 365, as well as custom and SaaS applications. So that's enough on the intro side. Let's talk about our agenda and then dive right into our session for today. So we're going to start with a quick intro to Office 365. I'm assuming that most people are familiar with 365, but I'm going to do a quick level set on that side and also talk a bit about Microsoft Ignite that happened last month. Lots of interesting news that came out of that session. And a lot of that is going to drive into our topics for today. We're then going to dive deeper into team and communication sites, then follow that with how we manage all those sites, and finally site provisioning. How do we build some process around the request and provisioning of sites in Office 365? We have a Q&A open. We've got a couple staff on the line as well who will be monitoring and responding. If there's some questions that they haven't been able to answer through the session, we'll either tag those at the end or follow up after the session. So without further ado, let's dive right into Office 365. So most of you are probably familiar with Office 365. Not sure how many are actually using it today. It's a broad suite of tools, both from an online point of view and from a desktop and mobile productivity tools perspective as well. And the app launcher that you see on the left there is what comes out when you launch into Office 365 and choose which application you want to go into. It keeps growing. They keep adding more applications to that. One of the things that came out of Ignite was actually some announcements around the change to the app launcher. It's becoming a little overwhelming for people. There's too much stuff there, and they've decided to simplify that and say, okay, well, let's have a simpler app launcher that shows the highlighted apps that you tend to use the most. You can personalize that, and then you can still get into the full set of apps from there. So it's a little less daunting for people coming in. They've also brought in some of the other SharePoint Hub Site concept of recent documents and such, so you can actually launch right into documents right from the app launcher there as well. We're on first release with our tenant, which means we get the bits as soon as they get announced out or released out into the first circle. We haven't seen the new app launcher in there just yet, but it is going to be coming out sometime through the fall here, so it's coming fairly soon. There's a blog link there if you're interested to dive a little deeper into that. I've mentioned Ignite. We're going to go a little deeper into that, but what I want to do first is just do a quick poll and get a sense from the audience how familiar you are with Microsoft Ignite. Have you heard about it? Did you actually attend it, which was awesome? It was down in Orlando, Florida, at the end of September. Or have you watched some of the recordings? I'm going to share a bunch of links as well. So after the fact, if you want to go back and dive deeper into some of the sessions that I talk about today, all of that's there. The full recordings are there. The videos are there. Even the PowerPoint decks are there. And I've teased some of the slides out of some of those decks with reference to the presentations that I'm drawing them from as part of my material here as well. So most of the folks heard about Microsoft Ignite. Only about 20% have attended. About 40% have watched some of the recordings. So that's great to see. People are taking advantage of the material that are there. There is a ton of material available. So let me close that out. And I'm just going to continue into the next session here. So there's, like I mentioned, a ton of sessions. There's actually 851 sessions available on demand. There was more sessions than that. They didn't record everything. Some of the smaller sessions that were in the expo hall didn't get recorded, but there's a ton of content up there and available. And there's a good search too, so if you're looking for a particular topic, you can dive through and dig into that. I mean, if you're going to watch one session from Ignite, I would probably encourage you to watch Jeff Teeper's keynote. This was on the Tuesday morning on the second day of the conference. It's basically an all-up of what's coming and what's happening from a SharePoint and a OneDrive point of view. Jeff is the corporate VP of Office SharePoint OneDrive, so he's the top engineering guy on that side. I mean, one of the slides that he shared early on in his session, just interesting in terms of cloud momentum of SharePoint and OneDrive. You know, the number of organizations, penetration into the Fortune 500, 2/3 of all SharePoint seats are online. So that's showing that we've had a tremendous shift from on-premises to cloud. Not to say that they're ignoring on-premises. In fact, part of Jeff's keynote, he announced that there's a SharePoint 2019 in the wraps that's going to be, we're to see early bits for it in 2018 next year. So they are committed to on-premise, but the momentum is definitely cloud first. 90% growth in active users, 300% growth in sync usage. That's not surprising. The sync tool, they did a lot of good work on in the last year or so and significantly improved that. So that's good to see. And 6-time leader in the Gartner and Forrester metrics. So awesome job on the SharePoint team side of things. Now, on the non-Microsoft side, they had a lot of MVP and industry speakers as well. One of the talks that I really enjoyed was 2 MVPs that I know well personally through the community, Susan Hanley and Dave Feldman. Dave is actually corporate part of Shire, and they were implementing a Office 365 intranet. They brought Susan in as part of the intranet team to help put together the governance, the information architecture, and such on that. So they did a great talk that talks about their journey of launching out that intranet to a fairly large global organization. So that whole talk is available online. The deck is up there. They've actually published a bunch of tools. There's you know, governance questions. There's actually some step-by-step for building out a governance site as part of your intranet. And that was one of the things that they stressed, you know, get your governance down first. But some of the other things that fall into the topics that we're going to talk about today, they really stress the importance of global navigation, of self-service site creation, and even site naming conventions. You know, we're going to talk about how to make it easy to create sites, and one of the things to worry about there is, well, how do we contain the sprawl around that? So things like having an appropriate site naming convention. We're going to talk more about communication sites versus team sites, understanding whether those are public or private and what the audiences are, how we name them appropriately so that people can find those. You don't want somebody creating a personal team site called HR because HR probably wants that as their communication site to broadcast to the broader group. So making sure that people understand those rules. I mean, that's a big part of what governance is about. It's not necessarily about putting restrictions in place. It's about putting appropriate communications and training plans and resources in place so people understand how they're supposed to use the tools and how best to leverage things from that point of view. So we're going to start our journey with team sites, and team sites go all the way back to SharePoint 2001. In fact, that was it for SharePoint 2001. It was all about the team site, and even that original team site template looks a lot like it does today. I mean, it didn't have a OneNote notebook because there wasn't OneNote, but it had a document library, it had a wiki library. You know, so the basic concept of a team site hasn't changed that much over the year. And you can extend that, you can customize that, add your own additional lists and libraries, add metadata to that. But it's very SharePoint centric. It's not bringing in the broader set of tools that make up Office 365. So over the last year or two, we've been hearing a lot about modern experiences. It started with the modern lists and the modern libraries. It broadened into modern team sites early in this year, and then communication site we heard about partway through the year back in the May event that they had from a Microsoft point of view. And that's really where things are evolving, is that modern experience. There hasn't been a significant change in the UI and the experience around SharePoint, particularly from a team sites and communication sites didn't exist. There's a publishing model there in the classic site. So there's a number of different styles of sites that you can create in SharePoint. We're going to talk about some of the differences and why we'd use one versus the other through there. But again, if you want to dive deeper, Mark Cashman and Jeremy Masner, two of the great guys that we often see when we go to Redmond for MVP Summit, did a talk together on sharing and working together on the internet with SharePoint team sites. So this kind of goes deeper into the team site concept. And then Mark did another talk with Andy on communication sites. If you want to get a deeper dive into those two topics, where are they going with modern team sites and modern communication sites, I'd encourage you to have a look at those. And again, I've included the links to the decks as well as the videos on both of those. So if we think about the types of sites that we've just chatted about. We started talking about team sites, we've mentioned communication sites. We haven't really talked about OneDrive for Business, but really that makes up the 3 places to work that Microsoft is focusing these different approaches on. So on the personal file side on the left, it's really about OneDrive for Business. It's private by default. You can share, so you could share either with team members internal to your organization, or you can do external sharing to people outside of. I really encourage people to not go too crazy from a sharing a personal files point of view. What you don't want to do is end up having your OneDrive becoming a team site effectively, where a bunch of people are working together on things. At that point, you should really be in a team site, which is the center category. You know, the idea here is to share content with your group. You've got a number of people either within or external to your organization that have a shared purpose, a common project, say, that they're working on. A team site makes a lot of sense for that. Then communication sites, they're really about broader publishing. So you've got news, you've got events, you've got things that you want to push out to a broader audience. Communication site is how you inform and engage with that audience. You know, it tends to be a much smaller number of content authors, a much larger number of readers or consumers of the content. Whereas a team site, typically everybody is a contributor into that. Everybody's working together and collaborating on the documents, the content that's in that team site. So if we think about the team site concept and working as a team, what does that mean? And the concept is that you create this team site that's inherently shared right from the start. Now, the second point here is actually really important. New members get full context. The concept is you may have a project team of half a dozen people that are working on a project. They may be, you know, half a year into that project, and some team members leave and some new team members come in. How do they get that context? You know, if all of the project management, all of the document sharing happen through people's email and inboxes, which often happens in a lot of organizations, those new members don't see any of that context. They don't have visibility to all that history. But if they're a member of a team site, they get all that context. They get all those shared documents that are in there, but they even get that conversation history. And we'll talk more about that in a second. Policy and lifecycle is important. You know, when does the team site get created? How long does it live for? What happens when it's inactive and no longer being used? Does it get archived? Does it get decommissioned, deleted? You know, thinking about the governance policies around what that lifecycle looks like. And then the last point, bringing in more than just SharePoint, bringing in that whole Office 365 group collaboration tools. So what does that look like? Well, as often the case with Microsoft, there's a lot of different choice and options in there. So when you create a modern team site, you inherently get what's called an Office 365 group. If you're not familiar with that, basically what it's doing is provisioning out a bunch of different technologies as part of that site. So it's not all in SharePoint. You've got Outlook email conversations and calendar that can be done. There's Microsoft Teams that allows you to do things like persistent chat. There's Yammer that you can embed conversations from an enterprise social point of view. There's the people side of it. You know, those can all come together as part of an Office 365 group. One of the things you need to decide as you're spinning up a new group site is how is that group going to work? You know, are we an email-centric organization and we're going to want to keep all of our conversations in email? Well, then use the email conversation features of the Office 365 group. And in my earlier example, when I was saying you've got, you know, those team members joining a project, say midstream, how do they see that conversational history? Well, the nice thing is that there's an archive of all of that in that email conversation history. So rather than it being in your inbox, it's actually part of the Office 365 group. It's fully searchable. Everybody can go see that. You know, if maybe you're enamored of the Slack style of working, Microsoft Teams might be a better approach, where you've got the idea of persistent chat, that you can chat back and forth, but it still becomes part of the history through that. Or maybe you've really embraced Yammer from an enterprise social and you want to use that. You know, so there's a lot of different choices that you need to decide as you spin up a group site. The important thing is you don't necessarily need to only use one as an organization, but you do need to only use one as a group within a particular Office 365 group. If half your group is using email and half is using Yammer, that's going to break down because people are going to miss communications through there. So you need to decide as a team, how are we going to organize our group and what that's going to look like. An organization needs to probably provide some guidance around that. But then under the hood, yes, we do still have a traditional team site. Now it's been modernized. There's a new look and feel through that. And we'll get into some demo a little later to show you what those look like. So if we come back and circle back to what those look like, so two styles of modern sites. The team sites on the left, you know, typically department team project level. There may be an extranet. There may be a committee site, lots of different scenarios that you can create team sites for, whereas communication sites tend to be around a campaign, an event, something you want to communicate with the organization as a whole. Training and policies, updates, reports, different examples from that point of view. Now, should put some caveats in there. I mean, communication sites are still pretty new, and some of the things that we would do on a traditional enterprise side intranet, we can't do yet in communication sites. If you've got a global organization and you wanted to have targeted news, depending on what country you work in or what office you're in, things like that, those levels of sophistication don't exist in communication sites yet. I imagine we'll probably see them coming in over time. So communication sites are great for more point campaigns or point communication strategies that you want to push forward, maybe less so for the all-up corporate communications for an enterprise style intranet. So there's still need for the publishing style, the old classic style intranets in those examples as well. Now, part of the challenge is you end up with all of these sites all over the place, and without getting too technical, each of these modern sites end up being their own site collection, which means it's a very flat structure. Every site is at the same level. There's no hierarchy. There's no subsites. How do you organize that? Well, one of the things they announced at Ignite was this concept of hub sites, and the concept is you can have a hub site, and then you can join one or more team sites and communication sites to that hub site. Basically, news and site activity that happens in those member sites rolls up to that hub site. You've got a common navigation that can go across those, so it makes it easy to navigate within the hub of sites. And you've got a consistent look and feel across those sites. So this is a great concept for providing some organization to them. It's not a multi-level structure, so a hub site can't belong to another hub site. You can't have, say, a 3-level hierarchy. It is strictly adding a second level to what is otherwise a flat hierarchy within the site structure. So it's a great step forward. I'm going to talk about some other things that we've done to kind of go beyond that and further from there. But what I'm going to do now is I'm going to switch over to demo and walk you through the experience of creating modern team and communication sites. And I'm going to start from an out-of-the-box experience point of view. So what I need to do first is fire off my app launcher and come to my SharePoint Home. If you haven't explored the new SharePoint Home, they've done a nice job here. Sorry, yes?
Hey, Pete, can you flip over screens?
Oh, am I presenting the wrong screen?
Yes, we're just in presenter mode, so that's okay. It's been great so far. Everyone's kind of getting a sneak peek at the next one, but for your demo, let's flip over.
Yeah, that's not going to work so well on the demo. Hang on a second here. Screen 2, there we go. That's coming through fine, Logan?
Yes, yeah, that's great.
Oh, okay, awesome. So yeah, I'm in my Office 365 here. I've gone to my SharePoint Hub, and what I see here is frequent sites that I may have pinned, suggested sites that it's surfacing for me, so it's using the Office Graph to bring content up from the various different sites. But the thing I want to focus on here is the create site. And this is how you create the new modern team sites and communication sites. You don't create them from within SharePoint itself. You come to the SharePoint Hub first. Originally, all we saw was a team site in here. As communication sites came online, we've added that in there as well. So I can create either a team site or a communication site. So let's start with a team site. I need to give it a site name. We'll keep it pretty simple there. Now, under the hood, anytime you're creating a modern site, I mentioned it's creating an Office 365 group for it as well. So it's actually asking me for a group email address. It's taking the site name and taking the spaces out and making that. It's actually showing me where the SharePoint site is going to get created. And I can decide what privacy levels I want to have on this. Is it a private site that I only want members to come into, or can anybody in the organization access it? I'm going to leave it public, let everybody access it from there. Now I have the option to add additional owners or members. I'm going to leave that for the time being. And it's going ahead and finishing up the site there. Now it takes a couple of minutes to go through the whole process. The SharePoint site comes up in a number of seconds, so that's awesome. They did a lot of work on the site provisioning process to make it a lot quicker to create the sites. But behind the scenes, it's creating the Outlook calendar, the Outlook inbox, things like that. That takes a little longer. So if I hit the group conversations here, I think I'll get a message saying, sorry, it's still provisioning that. We'll come back to that in a minute. I'll just give that a sec to fire up. Yeah, so it's still setting up the conversation space. So we'll take more of a tour around that when we come back. But let's have a look at the SharePoint team site that was created. So this is the modern team site. First and foremost, they've got news in here. So if there's things that you want to communicate out to the team as a whole, it's very easy to add news articles in through here. I just click on the add news. And this page authoring experience is very modern and interactive. I can say, well, I want to put some text into my page here. You know, maybe I actually want to put some reference into a file or a document that I've got in here, pictures. You know, I've got various different parts that I can add in through my news article. I can then publish it and have it show up on my news page from there. So there's my news page, away we go. So that modern experience is very quick, very fluid, very easy to work with. Even as I get down to working with documents, you know, the ability to drag documents in here, which we had before, but the ability to add additional metadata. Let's say I want to add columns to my document library. You know, I can do that right from my view here. So it's very easy to customize my team site and create it from there. So I'm going to leave that for a minute now, and I'm going to come back to my SharePoint Hub. And let's go ahead and create a modern communication site. So let's go ahead and do this, and communication site. Oops, caps lock, bear with me. And go ahead and finish that. Now you can define whether you want this self-service that I'm showing here to be available to users or not, and that's something I'm going to talk about later as to whether you want to have some process in place around how do people provision sites. Should they be able to just go ahead and create them, or does need to be some sort of process around that? And I would argue that you should want to have some process. You still want to have a fair bit of self-service there so that they don't need to go through an onerous process to create a site. But you do want some control steps in there. Think about a project site for a large project with a lot of team members. You might have 3 different people that decide we need a team site for this project, and you end up with 3 different sites for it. Well, that's not an ideal situation. You want to make sure that, you know, if somebody's requesting a site, somebody else hasn't requested a site for the same purpose, in which case you should direct them to the original site from there. So it takes a little longer to create the communication site. The nice thing with the communication site is they're very pretty right from the start. So we've got this hero web part up on the top here. I can customize the tiles that show up in here. I can customize the numbers of tiles and style to that. So if I come in here, I say, okay, well, I want to edit the details for the individual tiles, or I want to update the layout of it as a whole, I can go ahead and do that. I've got my news section, similar to I had for the team site, leverages the same functionality from that point of view. I have a new event section as well. So there's an events list that gets created as part of the communication site, and it surfaces the events up through here. Then we've got our standard documents, quick links, people that are associated with, and I can completely customize the content that I want to put on this page. You can see here the same page editing experience that I was showing you when I was editing the news article. You know, I can add in new parts through here. Embed those in. I can remove existing ones. I can update the configuration on them and define how they're going to work through there. So, I mean, you still need some style. The fact that they've gone a long way in terms of creating a very visually appealing template is one thing. It's still up to you to get the appropriate content to put in there to really finish the job from a strong communications point of view. Now, the other neat thing, both on the team site and the communication site, is a lot of efforts being done around things like the news as well. So there's mobile apps for iOS, Android, Windows Phone. There's a SharePoint app, and it actually consumes not only the sites, but the news feeds that are coming through here, so you can access those from a mobile point of view. So everything's mobile first as part of the strategy here. I'm showing it on a desktop, but whether I'm a tablet device or a smartphone, I'm going to have a similar rich experience on all those different devices. It's going to adapt and respond appropriately to the device that I'm on. So let's actually come back to my my team site demo. So bear with me a sec here. I went and close that tab. And I actually typed the right URL. And we're going to get to this sort of a segue to the next point, which is how do we find these sites that we've created? That can actually be a challenge, the discovery around them. So we've got our team site up and running here. I'm just curious if we've got our group conversations up and going now as well. Yep, it's firing up Outlook. So I mentioned different conversational choices around your team sites. In this case here, I'm showing the Outlook side of it. So when I say I want to start a conversation here, I'm basically having an email conversation, but the team site itself, as you can see here, has its own email address. And you can even define that you want this email address to be publicly accessible. So you could actually include external people as part of the conversation. They don't have access to the team site, but even their replies back, because you've CC'd the team site itself, are going to be part of that conversational history. In fact, we've started using this for support for some of our clients. We create an Office 365 group with an email alias. We provide that alias to our client. They can send support requests, inquiries, things like that into that alias, and all of that gets recorded in the Office 365 group site. So it comes to us immediately as email, but there's a history there. So if somebody new was to join the support part of the team, they'd be able to see all that past history there, and that's an important part of it. From here, I can get to my files, so I can see the files that I've saved in SharePoint. I'm not seeing the full SharePoint interface here. I'm actually just seeing the documents library within the Outlook interface. If I wanted to go over to the full SharePoint, I can click the site here and get to that. I also have a calendar, so I'm seeing my personal calendar in here. Let me turn that off, come to my team site, demo calendar, so I can book events. You can basically invite your project to meetings, just like you would invite a conference room or a projector that you want to book out from a resource point of view. The nice thing here is you now got a calendar history of all of the events that have happened around that project. So maybe I wasn't part of that particular meeting, but I know that it happened and who was involved in it, maybe the link to the OneNote for the notes on that as part of that. So it's, again, a great way to provide that history out to all members of the group through there. OneNote, of course, gets provisioned up as part of any team site. Even the older classic team sites have a OneNote as part of that. We find this is a great way to maintain not just meeting history, but all notes related to projects that we're working on. So basically what we do at Envision IT is we create a team site for every client that has a OneNote in it, and then all notes related to that client end up in that OneNote. And the beauty of OneNote is you can share it. I can have an offline copy on my laptop, on my phone. Other senior consultant staff can access that same OneNote. We can all put our notes in there, and it's all coming into that shared space. So it's a tremendous way to keep those sort of ad hoc conversations as part of that. And as I mentioned, I can come back to the full SharePoint site, see the site from there. Now, some of the challenges are linking from the different features. I've jumped into Outlook, I've come back to SharePoint, I went into OneNote. I can't see all the different things from all the different places. Here I'm in SharePoint, I can get back to my group conversations, but if I wanted to use Planner, which is another feature of the Office 365 group, I see the link in Outlook here, but I didn't see it in SharePoint. So that comes back to the navigation side of things. I think there's still a little more work that needs to do on the Microsoft side to pull that experience together and make it a cohesive experience. I mean, Planner is a cool thing. It's a great way to manage your tasks on your projects. In fact, if I come over to my marketing planner here, we were just using this for some work we were doing yesterday, planning out some web content we're going to be doing on the Extranet user manager site. So we can see all the different people, the things that they have assigned from a general, what needs to happen on the blogs, what has to happen on the websites. And I can group that by different people to say, okay, I want to look at it from assigned to what are the things that I need to do, what are other people doing within the organization around that. And I can even see a roll-up of that to get a sense of, how are we doing on that particular project. This is actually the support Office 365 group that I was talking about that we use for Ontario MD, one of our clients. So very powerful from that point of view. Okay, so that's all out of the box experience. Let's come back to the PowerPoint deck for a minute here. Just talk about some of the challenges that come up from that. The biggest one that I see is the site sprawl. The fact that you open up self-service for everybody, you don't put any guidance or controls around that, you're going to get a lot of orphan sites, inactive sites that need to get cleaned up, duplication where there's multiple sites, and people just won't be able to find appropriate sites from there. So how do we put some governance around that? How do we make that work? And part of it comes back to the administration side too. There's some real challenges there that Microsoft acknowledges and they're working on. There's some announcements that came out at night around the admin portal. The problem is that the current SharePoint admin doesn't show us the modern site. So if I create a communications site or a Office 365 group team site, I don't actually see that in the SharePoint admin. Now groups I can find in the Office 365 admin portal, but communication sites are kind of just lost out there. If you don't know the URL for it, you're stuck unless you know PowerShell. So I'll show you some tricks from that point of view. So let's have a quick look at the admin portal itself and how that hangs together. So if I come in here and I come to my main SharePoint admin, there we go. So this isn't a demo tenant, this is our production tenant that we're using as part of my demonstration here for Envision IT. So I can come into my main Office 365 portal and I can see the groups through here. So if we look at the demo sites that we created, are we going to see that? Part of the challenge is trying to find there we go. So that's the one that I just created there. It's an Office 365 group. So it actually shows not in the SharePoint section, but as part of the groups in the main Office 365 admin. That's really the only place to see that. If I want to work with that, I can actually delete that group if I want to clean that up, see who the members are, take ownership of it, etc. from that point of view. If I come down to my SharePoint admin, so this is the classic SharePoint admin. I'll take you into the new admin center in a second. So we can see our site collections here. It's just loading up, but I'm not going to see that team site in there. In fact, these are all the site collections that it's seeing, and I don't see my team site demo in there because it's a new modern site. I also don't see my communication site there either. If I come to my new SharePoint admin center, so they're basically taking the modern experience and applying it to the admin side as well. Improving from that perspective, I can come into my site management and I actually see there's my communication site demo, there's my team site demo that I just created. So they do show up through here. There's still some weirdness. This is definitely still in beta preview. I'm not actually seeing any of my sites that were created previously through there. In fact, if I go to my recycle bin, I see a whole bunch of sites which are actually live sites on the site. They're not deleted sites. So I'm not entirely sure what's happening here, but at least I've got somewhere to find those new sites through there. Okay, so if I come back to PowerPoint, we've done the demo there. So what we decided a while back, even before Microsoft talked about changes to the admin portal, we knew they were going to be doing some work there, is to say, you know what if we put a list in place in SharePoint to manage the sites? We know through PowerShell we can go discover all of the sites. So why don't we build a PowerShell script that will discover all the sites, both modern and classic, and populate a list in a single spot in SharePoint that tracks each site collection and all of its subsites. So it's going to look for deleted sites, updated sites, and net new sites, and update that list appropriately from there. Now, it takes a while to run. We haven't done any sort of optimizations on it. So far, we're using it internally at Envision IT. We've got about 1,000 site collections and subsites, which is not a big number. It's not a small one either. It takes probably an hour or two for the script to run through, because it's got to look at each site and see whether it exists or not, wait for it to time out if it doesn't and such. But one of the other things that we decided to introduce there, and this was before I'd heard about the Staff Hub idea as well, was this concept of a parent URL. To say, well, going forward, we know that we're not actually going to be creating subsites. The goal is that every site should be its own site collection. It can then be a group. We'll talk about some reasons why for that. But how do we bring a hierarchy into that? And how do we bring even multiple levels of hierarchy? That site A belongs to site B, that belongs to site C, and we can start to present a breadcrumb out from that. So we've built that parent URL concept in there to say, even though these sites aren't subsites of each other, they're related to each other, and we wanted to recognize that relationship. We also use the list to manage deployment and branding, and I'll talk more about that in a minute as well. So let's have a look at the site list itself. So if I come back to here and we have a site collection dedicated just to this called landing, and it has a sites list inside of it. So we've got roughly 1,000 items or so in there, and we can see we've grouped them by parent URL. So if I want to see, well, what are the sites that I have underneath development? Well, I can see there's a couple of different subsites underneath, and these are actually true subsites. They're not separate site collections, but one of our goals over time, and I'll talk more about this later, is to actually migrate those to their own site collections where it makes sense. We're not going to migrate every archive site. we'll leave those in archive, but active sites, we're going to start moving those across and creating independent site collections for those. You know, if we look at our top level root site collection, we see that we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 sub-sites underneath that. You know, if we wanted to blow away our top level site and create a new communication site, which by the way, you can't do just yet, they're working on that. You can only create communication sites as underlying site collections right now. But in any case, if we wanted to blow it away, we would actually end up blowing away all of these subsites as well. And that's part of the challenge of having subsites, is it makes it difficult to reorganize. If you say, well, you know, we start a potential client out in a potential client's subsite, and then if we land that business, we want to move them into the client's subsite, it actually takes a lot of work with ShareGate to move that site around. That doesn't make a lot of sense. If we just have a reference in this list that says this is the parent URL and we just change who that is, boom, we've updated that relationship, and away it goes from there. And you can see we can develop a full breadcrumb as part of that, and I'll show you where that shows up on the sites as well. So that's what we've got so far, is this SharePoint list that's getting populated by a PowerShell script. What can we do with that? What are some of the neat things we can achieve with that? Well, one of the cool things is just having a quick A to Z site listing for different parts of the sites. So we've got potential clients I mentioned, we've got clients, we've got partners, we've got archive sites. You know, those are all parts of a hierarchy. So here right now I'm in the partners section, and I can say, okay, I can go down into, say, the Nintex site underneath that. So I was able to quickly navigate and figure out where that Nintex site is. Now, right now, yes, it is a subsite underneath sales and partners, but ideally in the future, it should actually be its own site collection. So if we want to have an Office 365 group around that, maybe we want to bring our account rep from Nintex into those conversations as part of that, we can do all of those things. And we can see here that we built out a breadcrumb. We've got some branding work. We've got a double breadcrumb showing up in this one here, but I can drill down, say, into my shared documents, even down into subfolders within that, and we can actually build out a dynamic breadcrumb of where we are on the site. And right now, yes, these are all on top of each other in a subsite structure, but in the future, you know, the sales, the partners, the Nintex can all be independent site collections, all at the flat top level, but we still have this virtual hierarchy that we've associated it through here. So if I need to jump up to a different partner, I can just click on the partners link, get back to my A to Z part, and go into another partner from there. So this part itself, this is actually a SharePoint Framework web part that we've built. So I can edit this page here. I'll just give 365 a second there to catch up. There we go. And I can edit my web part. So I'm using it on a classic page right now. The nice thing about SharePoint Framework web parts is you can use them on both modern and classic pages. The experience looks a little different about how you edit it, but the net functionality is exactly the same. So here's my configuration for our A to Z site listing. I can say, well, I actually want to show it as a list versus tabs. So I can just have a full list of all the links there. I can say, you know what, I do like those tabs. And what it's doing is it's looking for every site in that site list who has a parent URL set of /sales/partners. So you can define this web part at any point in that hierarchy and say, show me all the sites related to this point in the hierarchy. Where is that master site list and what's the list called? So it's very easy to drop this web part in different spots on the site and work with it from there. Let me just stop editing. So we've talked about the list. We've talked about the A to Z web parts, so the idea that can be filtered to a parent site, shows all the children. We can drop it on any modern or classic site, so that's great. I showed you the breadcrumb control as well. So we've got the Nintex example here. Basically what's happening is we've got some JavaScript in the master page that does a query. It says, okay, what's the URL that you're currently on? Let me go search against that sites list, but let me also look for the name of the document library that you're in, and are you in any folders, you know, however deep that structure may go, and it dynamically builds out that breadcrumb on the fly. So it's very nice to provide guidance through there, and it's handy from a you want to share things. If I say, well, I'm just going to right-click on guides, for example, and grab that hyperlink and IM it to somebody and say, here, go look in this folder. This is where all the stuff is that you're looking for. So it makes it very easy to share content back and forth from that point of view. Now, one of the other points that came up in Susan Hanley and David Feldman's talk early on in my session that I mentioned is the idea of global navigation. And this is an important point for me as well, the fact that wherever I am in the site hierarchy, I want to see a consistent navigation that lets me get anywhere else from there. So if we come back to our site for a minute here, we'll see we've got a top-level global nav here. Now this has been done on a classic site, so we've actually customized the master page. And there's those that would say, you know, that's a bad thing to do because you're opening up for future incompatibility issues with Microsoft as they change their master pages. We said, let's go ahead and do that, but do it in a way that is very minimal changes to that. So if Microsoft changes the master page in the future, we can just reapply our navigation easily to that. And the way that this works is you still manage the navigation in the term store. We use managed navigation as part of that, but we don't use SharePoint to render that navigation. We actually embed it in the custom master page, and we've done that in a way leveraging Bootstrap that is mobile friendly. And basically what happens is every site collection needs its own master page. You can't reference a common central one. So we actually use that list to manage the updating of that. So if we look back at that SharePoint list that we were looking at previously, we see here we've got things like branding deployment type, whether we should set the composed look in the master page. For that, we can actually run the PowerShell script through and say, okay, now go apply this custom master page all the way through as part of that. Deploy out the assets to the root site collection, basically manage the deployment process around that. And then later, if you decide to change your global navigation, you can change it once in the term store, run the PowerShell script, and it'll go through and update all the sites from there. So it's a nice way to keep that consistent together. Now there's some future things coming from Microsoft around SharePoint extensions. They just went into preview that will allow us to put in our own global navigation even on modern sites, which we can't do today. So we're looking forward to that. We just started playing around with that. We haven't built anything from a nav point of view just yet. But that's the direction that we're going, because right now our approach only works on the classic sites. We want something that's going to work on the modern communication sites and modern team sites as well. Now, a lot of what I've shown you is actually leveraging under the hood a great open source project from Microsoft called Office Dev and SharePoint PNP. PNP stands for Patterns and Practices. It's basically a couple of really smart folks at Microsoft who in their spare time, non-work time, decided to start to build some code samples and some reusable components to make it easier to do SharePoint development. And it really started to catch on, and after a couple of years of doing this, Microsoft actually recognized it and said, okay, you guys are doing an awesome job. We're gonna actually make you part of the engineering team, and this is now your full-time job. So they're now actively supporting it corporately and driving this forward. So this has become a great resource for us and for many in terms of doing any sort of SharePoint development. So one of the features of the patterns and practices is called a provisioning engine. And it's basically a way to provision SharePoint sites. You can create templates, and then you can create new sites from that quite easily. This is actually from the previous Ignite 2016, so this is now about 1.5 years old, this slide. Imagining it's been used in a lot more than 500 tenants at this point now. It was fairly early on at this juncture. But basically what happens is you start with a template site and you snapshot that template. So there's some PNP scripts that you run that create a file that basically captures the structure of that site as a template. And then you create a new empty out-of-the-box site and you apply that template to it. So you use the PNP scripts and you basically get a new site that has all the template features from your template site. So let's say you've got a standard format for a project site that you want to have. You can actually create a sample site as a template site, and we've actually done that. So if I come back over here, where am I here? Too many links open, hang on a second. There we go. We've got a client site template, which is a modern team site that we've created. And yes, we still use folders in certain situations. We've got some line of business processes from way back that expect things in a certain structure. So we actually have 2 document libraries in all of our client sites. One is called documents or shared documents, and the other is private documents. The idea is that we typically share our client sites with our clients. We use our Extranet User Manager product to invite them in, and that'll be a main topic of our next webinar. But we don't want to share all the content across. You know, there's budgets in process, things that we're doing from a VizDev point of view that maybe we're not ready to share with the client. So we keep that all in a private documents. And we set up the permissions so that clients don't see the private documents, they only see the shared documents from there. So we've got a fairly strict structure of how we want a client site to be built out. So we build this client template just using a GUI, adding libraries, adding folders, adding metadata to that, and then we run the PNP scripts, and it captures this as a template. Then we can create a brand new blank vanilla team site and apply this template to it, and presto, we've got a new client site ready to go for a particular client from there. So how do we make that process easier to happen? Well, we write some scripts, but we also wanted to provide basically a site request form to that. So if we look back at our sites list that we have here, I have the ability to say, I just want to create a new item in here, and I'll get the out-of-the-box form coming up for me to fill in all the different columns that exist in the content type for this list. So what's the title of the site, what's the URL, what's its parent URL, but then there's a bunch here that are really administrative functions that an end user shouldn't be filling out. So ideally what I'd like to see is a simplified version of that form. So rather than the full owner's form here, all I need is the name of your site, what's its URL going to be, does it have a parent, and what template do you want to use? So we can see here in our dropdown, is this a client site? So we want to use that template that we've created. Is it an out-of-the-box communication site? Is it a project site, which is another template we have, or is it an out-of-the-box team site? So pick one of those 4 templates, and then a PowerShell script will run and drive that process out from there. So basically what it's going to do is run the script and create the appropriate site based on the template that you've asked for there. So it's basically looking for any new list items that haven't been provisioned yet in there. One of the fields in there has the site been created. So when you initially request the site, it's not filled in. You may want to put an approval process on there where somebody needs to approve that new site request. Excuse me. Once they've done that approval, then the script runs from there. Right now, we've got it as a manual script running, but it's something that we're looking to automate to say, let's just have this run every 5 minutes, say, so somebody can request a site. 5 minutes later, it's up and running and going from there. Now, depending on the type of site that you requested, different state of where we've gotten with that. If it's a classic team site or one with a template, that's something that we support today in our script using the PNP stuff. If it's a modern team site, this is still evolving. There's sort of a 2-step process where you create the Office 365 group first, and then you go apply the PNP template to the SharePoint site that results from that. And there's some timing challenges there that, if you do the second step right away, is the SharePoint site actually there to apply the template to? So we're still working out a few details there. And the PNP team is doing work on this. They just announced there's a blog post down at the bottom there that I put in from 6 days ago of some new features they've added around the provisioning around the modern sites. So we haven't had a chance to absorb that and make that part of the process, but we're thinking that that'll simplify things for us there as well. The modern communication sites, when we last looked at it, they didn't have PNP support for it. As part of this post here, it is now in beta as of a couple of days ago to be able to provision modern communication sites through that process as well. So it's all evolving. Ignite was only a month ago. A lot of this stuff is still very new, but it's really starting to come together from that point of view. So the goal would be, let's have a simple form that somebody fills out. Maybe there's an approval step as part of that. There's a schedule script that runs in the background. It goes ahead and creates a site from there, and away you go. Now, what about our existing sites? I've mentioned we've got 1,000-odd sites. A lot of those are sub-sites. How do we migrate those to modern sites? And there was a new verb put together at Ignite, this concept of groupifying a site. So the idea is I've got a classic team site. How do I groupify it and light up all the group features on that? Well, the caveat is that site that you want to groupify needs to be a site collection. It can't be a sub-site of another site. It can't turn that into a group site because everything's based around it being its own independent site collection. So there will be support coming from Microsoft to say, hey, if you've got a whole bunch of site collections and you want to groupify those and make those modern, we're going to have a journey that you can follow to make that happen. The challenge is if you've done like us and created a bunch of sub-sites, there's a fair bit of work that needs to happen first. And Dan Holm, who's another MVP, has been calling sub-sites the spawn of Satan for a long time. He's not a fan of them. I probably should have listened to him, but nevertheless, we've got all these sub-sites. What do we need to do with them? Well, we need to convert them to a site collection. There's nothing out of the box for that, nothing coming from Microsoft for that. So really what we need to do is create a new modern team site, which inherently is going to create an Office 365 group as part of that. and then migrate the content into that. Our tool of choice is ShareGate. We're a ShareGate partner, so we'll likely just spin that up and say, okay, now we need to migrate that content in. You know, similar experience to when we moved from on-premises SharePoint to Office 365 of going through that. And we're going to have to make some decisions to say, well, which sites do we want to do this for? We obviously don't want to do them for all 1,000. Let's pick our battles and figure out which ones we want to bring across as part of that. Okay. So I'm getting close to the top of the hour. Let me just do another quick poll here, and then I'm going to do some wrap up. So let me open up the second poll. I didn't want to do this at the beginning because I wanted people to get a sense of what the terms were. What is a modern team site? What is a modern communication site before I ask the question? So I want to get a sense, you know, who uses just classic sites, or have you started rolling out either modern team sites or modern communication sites? Do you have a governance plan in place today? What does that look like? What about site management and provisioning? Do you have that going today? So I'm going to leave that open for a minute. I'm going to take a quick break, have a sip of water. So leave that open for another 15 seconds or so. We'll get a few more people, and then we can share that back. Okay. So let me actually share the results from that. So about 3/4 of the audience here today only use classic sites, and that's not surprising. I mean, the modern sites are very new. There's still been some challenges around branding, around navigation that I see as stoppers for them. Those are getting solved now, so that's nice to see. And we're going to start rolling out modern sites ourselves, which we've just begun that journey of. About 1/3 have started rolling out modern sites, and 1/4 modern communication sites. Nobody with a governance plan, so that's interesting. You know, you really want to have some sort of plan in place there. Obviously, you've got SharePoint already going there. It doesn't mean it's too late to start with that. 9% with the site management provisioning. You know, again, that's something to think about from that perspective. Now, I've shown you a bunch of IP that we've developed at Envision IT. A number of these have been developed as part of client projects, as well as internal work that we've been doing. We've kind of been debating what, if any, do we want to open source out? Do we want to license this? What do we want this to look like? I'm always curious if people are interested in what they've seen and want to learn more about how to use that in their own sites. I am open to sharing some of it from an open source point of view. Go ahead and send me an email to let me know that you're serious and interested, and we can certainly follow up and have a discussion on what that looks like. Okay, let me just hide that, and just coming to wrap up from here. So modern sites are the future. I mean, this is where the investment is happening from Microsoft, both team and communications, and I don't imagine those are the last two that we'll see. I haven't heard anything as to what other style of modern sites may be coming down the pipe, but I'm sure we'll see more from there. Groups come with them. I mean, they're intertwined. When you create a team site, you get a group. You get an Outlook conversation and calendar, you get a team, you get a planner, you get all these tools. You need to understand how to leverage those appropriately. And this is where governance becomes important, making sure that people understand the different tools, what's appropriate, how to use them, what are the rules and policies in place. Really figure out how to manage all your sites. You know, if you're a larger organization, we're a 15-person company, we've got 1,000 sites. You know, if you're a 15,000-person company, you're going to have a much larger number there, and managing that is a real challenge. So figure out how to manage that. I'm a big fan of the site list point of view, and that's probably the first thing that we would look to open source, is to say, well, let's just push out the list itself and the PowerShell script that populates it. You can take it from there in terms of how you want to leverage that and use that from that point of view. Building out a provisioning process, the P&P guys at Microsoft have done a fantastic job of building a lot of tools for that. There's still a little bit of lifting, but it's not too heavy in terms of building out that provisioning process. And put a plan together to move from classic to modern. You know, how are you going to leverage the new experiences, and what's your journey look like going across from there? So just to wrap up, this is actually part of a trilogy. There's 3 webinars that we're doing. This one 2 weeks from now, and then a week following that. The next one is about external sharing. So I mentioned our Extranet User Manager. It's not exclusively focused on that. We're going to talk about, much like we did today, the out-of-the-box experience, How do you share directly in SharePoint? How do you use B2B, which is part of Azure Active Directory? Or how do you use a tool like Extranet User Manager? What are the things you should think about as you're turning on external sharing and having, again, appropriate governance around that? So that's 2 weeks from today. And then the week following that, we're doing a third session on publishing Office 365 websites to external users with Azure. And the idea here is that you've got web content that you've authored in SharePoint. How do you actually push that out to a broader audience without bringing those people into Office 365? There's scenarios where it doesn't make sense to bring those people into 365. Maybe it's a public-facing website. Example is the webinar we did this summer for Ontario ND. Their public website is authored in Office 365, but hosted in Azure. So when people come to it, they're actually hitting that Azure website, not SharePoint. And there's advantages to that. It can be a public anonymous site, but it can also be private as well. You can secure particular parts of that and share content from there. So if you go to eom.co/events, you'll see the full list of events coming up through there. We also have a number of conferences coming up. We'll be in Chicago in December for SharePoint Fest, and then in Washington also with SharePoint Fest in March. And then big conference coming up in Las Vegas in May, the return of the SharePoint conference. This is a big deal. There's a lot of folks coming from Microsoft. Jeff Kiefer, who I mentioned is the VP engineering for SharePoint, is going to be keynoting. This is really going to be Microsoft's platform for the next big set of announcements. So we saw a bunch in September in Ignite. We're going to see a bunch more coming out in the May conference in Las Vegas. So that'll be exciting. So I haven't had a chance to look at questions. I'm not sure if there's ones there that we want to have a peek at or just follow up afterwards.
So Peter, there was a question about creating hub sites. Can you create a hub site as an Office 365 root site?
So today, you can't create modern sites as root sites, whether it's a hub site or communication site or a modern team site. The UI doesn't allow that. The PowerShell doesn't have the hooks to do that just yet. It is a highly voted feature request on Microsoft's side, so it is something I imagine they're going to be providing, but right now that's not there. And then there was also a question about the PowerShell scripts to list the sites. What I'll do is I'll put together, I didn't want to get into code too much in this session, but I can put some snippets of scripts together and make them part of the follow-up that goes out after the session when we post the recordings up. So with that, I think we're all set. We are just before the top of the hour, so the timing actually worked out well. I want to thank everybody for joining us today. Have a great rest of your day and look forward to talking again in 2 weeks' time at our next webinar. Bye now.